The night before my wedding, I should have been lost in dreams of white lace and forever promises. But instead, I found myself standing frozen outside the door of a hotel suite, listening to the man I thought I loved tear apart everything I believed we shared. I'm 30 years old, a woman who's had to build her life piece by piece since losing my parents, and I thought I'd finally found a home in Harrison's family. His mother treated me like a daughter, his sister like the best friend I never had. And yet that night, I overheard my fiancé laugh as he told his friends I was just a temporary choice, a stepping stone, until someone better came along. His words sliced through me more cruelly than any blade could. In that instant, every tender moment, every promise, every kiss we'd shared, shattered into lies scattered at my feet. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I went home, sat in front of my laptop, and pulled up every business record, every email, every secret he thought I would never see. What I found in those files was darker than his betrayal of my heart. It was the betrayal of hundreds of lives tied to the company his family built. I sat there until dawn, scrolling through evidence of fraud, embezzlement, secret accounts, and love letters to a woman who wasn't me, but sat proudly on his company's board. My body trembled with something that wasn't grief anymore. It was clarity. The man waiting to marry me was nothing but a master of deception, a con artist with a tuxedo and a perfect smile. And I realized I had a choice. I could walk away silently, leaving him to continue his lies, or I could make sure that when he fell, the whole world would see it. That morning, I slipped the evidence into an envelope and tucked it into my wedding gown. I painted on my makeup like war paint, fastened his grandmother's pearls around my neck, and prepared not to become his wife but his reckoning. Walking down that aisle, every eye on me, I carried not just flowers in my hands, but the weight of justice against my thigh. Harrison smiled at me with that same smug confidence, sure of his control, sure of his charm. He whispered that I looked stunning, and I did, but not for him. I looked stunning for myself, for the woman who had survived betrayal and found the courage to fight back. When the priest began to speak, I stopped him. I turned to the crowd and pulled out the envelope. My voice was steady, carrying through the church as I read not from scripture, but from Harrison's own emails. The silence turned into gasps, then into chaos. His mother's tears, his sister's confusion, his own mask crumbling as federal agents stepped inside. By the time the handcuffs snapped around his wrists, I knew this wasn't the ending of a love story. It was the beginning of something far more powerful. My revenge wasn't just personal, it was the truth finally unleashed, and it was beautiful in its devastation. But the strangest part, as I walked out of that church alone, sunlight pouring over me like absolution, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't defined by someone else's lies or my longing for a family. I was defined by my choice, my refusal to be silent, my demand for respect, my belief that love without truth is no love at all. That day, in front of 200 guests and countless cameras, I didn't just leave a man. I destroyed the illusion of who he was. And maybe in some small way, I destroyed the illusion of who I thought I was too. When I left the church that day, I wasn't walking away from just a wedding. I was walking away from the version of myself who had once believed silence was safer than truth. My heels clicked against the stone steps, echoing in the stunned quiet outside, where guests whispered and photographers scrambled for angles. I remember the sunlight, how it cut across my veil like fire, and how I felt oddly weightless, like I had finally set down a burden I didn't even know I'd been carrying for years. I was 30 years old, and for the first time since losing my parents, I wasn't wishing for someone else to save me. I had saved myself. But the aftermath wasn't neat. It never is. My phone exploded with messages within hours, some from friends who praised me for my courage, others from people who only saw drama and scandal. Harrison's family tried to reach me too. His sister begged for answers, his mother demanded I retract what I'd said, and even his father, who rarely spoke to me, left a voicemail saying, You've ruined us. I played that message on repeat, my chest tight with a mix of vindication and sorrow. Because I hadn't ruined them. Harrison had. I just refused to keep their secrets. The hardest part, though, was the quiet after the storm. I returned to the apartment I'd shared with Harrison, but it no longer felt like mine. His suit still hung in the closet, his cologne clung to the air, and photographs of us smiled from every wall. I boxed them up in silence, each frame a reminder of how carefully he had curated his lies. And then tucked away in the bottom drawer of his desk, I found more than I expected: handwritten notes, contracts, and even receipts that tied his fraud not just to faceless accounts, but to real people whose lives he had destroyed. Small businesses siphoned dry, pensions gutted, employees stripped of everything. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was cruelty on a scale that made me sick to my core. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't walk away and pretend exposing him at the altar had been enough. So I called the investigator who had slipped into the church that day, the one who had waited for my signal before stepping forward with handcuffs. His name was Detective Marlowe, and when I told him what else I'd found, he came to my apartment within the hour. Together, we spread the documents across the kitchen table. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the pages, his jaw tight. "You realize," he said, "this goes deeper than anyone thought. You didn't just humiliate him. You detonated something much bigger." And that's when the fear crept in. Because Harrison wasn't just a groom with secrets, he was part of a machine, a family business built on decades of corruption. By exposing him, I hadn't just broken an engagement. I had declared war. The threats started soon after. Anonymous numbers lighting up my phone notes slipped under my door, even whispers at the grocery store from people who had once smiled at me. "You should have stayed quiet," one message read. Another said, "You don't know who you're dealing with." They were right, I didn't know. But I knew myself now, and I wasn't afraid to fight. Still, I would be lying if I said it didn't take its toll. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made a mistake, if I'd unleashed something I couldn't control. But every time doubt clawed at me, I thought of the faces of the people Harrison had hurt, the families left with nothing. I thought of my own mother, who had once told me that truth may not protect you, but it frees you. And I chose freedom, no matter the cost. What surprised me most was the support that began to rise from unexpected places. Women I barely knew reached out, sharing their own stories of betrayal, of standing up to men who thought they were untouchable. Strangers stopped me on the street to say they admired what I'd done. And somewhere in that chaos, I found a strange kind of community, a reminder that even in devastation we aren't alone. But as the investigation deepened, so did the danger. Harrison wasn't just facing prison, he was desperate. And desperate men don't go down quietly. I'll never forget the first time I saw him after the wedding. It was 2 weeks later in a dimly lit conference room at the courthouse. His once perfect suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, but his eyes, those same eyes that had once promised me forever, still burned with arrogance. He leaned across the table, his wrists shackled, and hissed, "You think you won? You have no idea what you've started." For a moment, fear pierced through me. My throat tightened, my hands trembled under the table. But then I remembered the voices of the people he had ruined, the weight of the evidence I had carried down the aisle, and I forced myself to meet his glare. "I didn't start this," I whispered. "You did." Leaving that room, I understood something new. Revenge wasn't a single moment of triumph. It was a battle fought every day against the echoes of manipulation, the lingering scars of betrayal. I was no longer Harrison's fiancée, no longer the girl hoping to be accepted into his glittering world. I was the woman who had broken free, and that freedom came with a cost. The case stretched on for months. Reporters camped outside my apartment, hungry for headlines. Some called me a hero, others branded me a vengeful bride who had humiliated a man at the altar. My reputation was debated by strangers who knew nothing of the sleepless nights, the threats that still slipped into my mailbox, the ache of loneliness when the adrenaline faded, and I was left alone with my choices. But I never regretted them, especially not the night Detective Marlowe called me to the station to review new evidence. He laid out files showing that Harrison hadn't acted alone. His father and several board members had orchestrated the fraud together, using Harrison as both shield and sword. They had groomed him to carry their legacy of corruption, and he had played his role with pride. My stomach churned as I realized that marrying him would have meant marrying into decades of blood-stained money and lies. That night, I went home and poured myself a glass of wine. For the first time, I cried not for Harrison, not even for the love I thought I'd lost, but for the girl I used to be. The one who longed so desperately for family that she ignored the cracks in the foundation. I let myself mourn her, because she had been real. She had loved deeply, and she had deserved so much better than the man I almost married. But grief has a way of reshaping itself into strength. And when I wiped my tears, I saw my reflection differently. My eyes were sharper, my posture straighter. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was rising. As the trial loomed closer, Harrison's mother reached out to me. She showed up at my door one rainy evening, her perfect hair plastered to her cheeks, mascara streaking her face. "Please," she begged, "don't do this. He's my son." Her voice cracked with desperation, and for a flicker of a moment I almost softened. Until I remembered the voicemail where she'd accused me of ruining them. Until I remembered how she had stood silent as her son mocked me behind closed doors. "I'm not doing this to him," I said quietly. "I'm doing this for everyone he hurt." She left without another word, but her eyes carried a hatred that told me the war wasn't over. And maybe it never would be. Still, I pressed on. When the trial began, I walked into that courtroom with my head high, wearing the same pearls I had fastened around my neck on my wedding day. They were no longer symbols of his family, they were mine now, tokens of survival. And as I took the stand, the weight of every lie I had uncovered pressed on my shoulders, but my voice didn't waver. Because this wasn't just my story anymore. It was the story of everyone who had been betrayed, used, discarded. And I was determined to tell it. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes every breath feel heavier. I sat there under the glare of fluorescent lights, my palms damp against the wood of the witness stand, staring at the man I had once imagined building a life with. Harrison wouldn't look at me at first. He sat with his jaw clenched, whispering with his lawyers, the very picture of entitlement. But when I began to speak, when I told the jury about what I overheard the night before our wedding, about the documents I found about the years of manipulation and the lives destroyed, he finally turned his eyes toward me. And for the first time, I saw fear there. It wasn't just me testifying. One by one, people came forward, employees who had been silenced, partners who had been cheated, families who had lost everything. Their voices trembled, some broke down in tears, but all of them pointed to the same man and the family that had hidden behind him. The weight of truth filled the room until it felt suffocating, but I welcomed it. This was justice, messy and brutal but real. During cross-examination, his lawyer tried to break me down. He brought up the photograph Harrison had once used to shame me, the fragments of my past I had buried. He asked if I was just a scorned bride seeking revenge. I felt my throat tighten, old shame clawing at me. But then I remembered what my mother once told me. The truth doesn't need to shout, it only needs to stand. So I stood. "I am not here because of a broken heart," I said clearly, my voice steady. "I am here because people deserve to know the truth, and I won't let fear silence me." Gasps echoed through the gallery, reporters scribbled furiously, and the judge called for order. But in that moment, I knew I had reclaimed every piece of myself Harrison had tried to shatter. The trial dragged on for weeks. Harrison's mask cracked little by little until he was no longer the charming fiancé I once loved, but a desperate man clinging to excuses. His family unraveled too, his father exposed as the architect of the fraud, his mother revealed as the silent enabler who had known more than she ever admitted. The empire they had built on, lies crumbled, and the world finally saw them for what they were. And yet when the verdict was read guilty on multiple counts, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. Because victory doesn't erase scars. Justice doesn't give you back the years you lost, or the trust that was shattered, or the love that died before it could live. It only gives you space to begin again. Afterward, I walked out of that courthouse into a sea of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. They wanted a statement, a headline, a soundbite to package into the evening news. But I didn't give them one. I just kept walking, the pearls cool against my skin, the sun sharp in my eyes. My story wasn't theirs to consume, it was mine to carry. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened the box where I had kept my wedding dress. The silk still smelled faintly of flowers, the hem still dusted with dirt from that church aisle. I touched it one last time before folding it back inside, not as a symbol of loss, but as a reminder of survival. Because the truth is, revenge didn't heal me. Exposing him didn't erase the pain, but it gave me something I had lost long before Harrison ever came into my life, the power to choose myself. And that, more than any love or any vow, is what saved me. If my story reached you, if you've ever been betrayed, silenced, or made to feel small, remember this. You are not powerless. Your voice matters, your truth matters, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to stay quiet. So if this story spoke to you, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment telling me your own story. Let's build a place where our voices are louder than betrayal, where our truths light the way for others still in the dark.